Long before we trusted our secrets to computer algorithms and digital encryption, people were finding remarkably clever ways to hide their most sensitive information. And I'm not just talking about simple codes or invisible ink. The methods developed before the Internet era were absolutely ingenious, combining mathematics, psychology, and sometimes pure audacity in ways that would make modern cryptographers nod with respect. Picture this. It's World War II, and you're a resistance fighter in occupied France. You need to send a message to London, but the Nazis are monitoring every single transmission. One wrong move and you're done. So what do? You turn to a device that looks like an innocent wooden box with rotating wheels. This is the famous Enigma machine's lesser-known cousin, but the Allies had their own tricks up their sleeves too. The thing about pre-internet encryption is that it had to be both mathematically sound and physically practical. You couldn't just download an app. You needed something you could carry, something you could use under pressure, often in the dark or while being hunted. This constraint actually led to some of the most brilliant innovations in cryptographic history. Let me take you back to the 1920s. A German engineer named Arthur Scherbius was tinkering in his workshop when he created something that would change warfare forever. The Enigma machine used a series of rotors that would scramble letters in ways that seemed impossible to crack. Every time you pressed a key, the rotors would turn, changing the encryption pattern. The number of possible combinations was astronomical, something like 150 million possibilities. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Germans were so confident in their machine that they made a fatal assumption. They believed that even if the Allies captured an Enigma machine, they'd never be able to break the code because the settings changed daily. What they didn't count on was human error and brilliant minds working together at a place called Bletchley Park. Now, the Enigma is famous, sure, but it wasn't the only game in town. The Americans developed something called the SIGABA machine, which the Germans and Japanese never managed to break throughout the entire war. Not once. This machine was so complex that it used 15 rotors instead of Enigma's 3 or 4. It was bulky, it was difficult to operate, but it was virtually unbreakable with the technology of the time. What many people don't realize is that some of the most effective encryption methods weren't mechanical at all. They were linguistic. The United States military recruited Navajo speakers to create a code based on their native language. The brilliance of this wasn't just that Navajo was incredibly difficult to learn. It was that the code talkers created new words for military terms that didn't exist in Navajo. A fighter plane became a hummingbird. A battleship became a whale. A bomb was an egg. The Japanese, who had managed to break every American code they encountered, were completely baffled. They captured Navajo soldiers and tried to force them to translate the messages, but even native speakers couldn't crack it without knowing the specific military vocabulary the code talkers had invented. It was encryption through cultural knowledge, and it was devastatingly effective. But let's go back even further in time, to an era when encryption was literally a matter of life and death for individuals, not just nations. In the Renaissance, people were getting their heads chopped off for saying the wrong things, so secret communication was essential. Mary, Queen of Scots, learned this the hard way when her encrypted letters plotting against Queen Elizabeth were intercepted and decoded. The cipher she used was actually quite sophisticated for the time, using symbols to represent letters and even some null characters to throw off codebreakers. But it wasn't sophisticated enough. The person who broke Mary's cipher was Thomas Philips, one of history's first professional codebreakers. He worked for Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, and he was apparently a rather unassuming man with a pockmarked face and a genius for patterns. He could break codes that others thought were impossible, and his work directly led to Mary's execution. This was encryption meeting intelligence work in its rawest form. One of my favorite pre-internet encryption stories involves the Zimmermann telegram from World War I. Germany sent an encrypted message to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States. The British intercepted it and managed to decrypt it using a combination of captured German codebooks and brilliant cryptanalysis. But here's the tricky part. They couldn't just reveal the message because that would tell Germany that their codes were broken. So British intelligence had to create an elaborate deception to make it look like they'd obtained the message through a spy in Mexico. The revelation of this telegram helped push America into the war. The Cold War brought encryption into a whole new era, but still before the Internet as we know it. The Soviet Union used one-time pads, which are theoretically unbreakable if used correctly. The concept is beautifully simple. You have a pad of random numbers, and your recipient has an identical copy. You use each page once to encrypt a message, then destroy it. As long as the pad is truly random, never reused, and kept secret, the encryption is perfect. The problem is practicality. How do you distribute thousands of pages of random numbers to spies around the world without them being discovered? The Soviets got clever about this. They had agents memorize number sequences, they used microdots to hide pads. They even encoded pads into seemingly innocent items like playing cards or music sheets. When American counterintelligence found a one-time pad, they knew they'd found a spy, but the messages themselves remained locked away, unreadable. Meanwhile, during this same period, businesses were trying to protect their secrets too. Banks needed to send financial information securely. The solution they developed was something called the Data Encryption Standard, which became official in the 1970s. This was encryption moving from the purely mechanical world into the early digital age, but still well before the Internet era. What's fascinating is that even back then, there were concerns that the National Security Agency had deliberately weakened DE to make it easier for them to break. This tension between government surveillance capabilities and private encryption strength is not a new debate at all. There's also a beautiful simplicity to some pre-internet encryption that we've lost in the digital age. Take the Jefferson disk, invented by Thomas Jefferson in the 1790s. It's a cylinder with rotating disks, each with the alphabet scrambled on it. You line up your message on one row, then send the letters from any other row as your encrypted text. Your recipient, with an identical disk, can reverse the process. No electricity, no computers, just clever mechanical design and agreed-upon procedures. Here's something that might surprise you. Some of the most secure communications in the pre-internet era used steganography rather than encryption. That's hiding the existence of the message itself, not just scrambling its contents. During World War II, resistance fighters would use microdots, shrinking photographs of documents down to the size of a printed period. You could hide an entire page of text in a letter, completely invisible unless you knew where to look and had a microscope handy. The Nazis actually developed some impressive steganographic techniques too. They'd hide messages in the patterns of knitted goods, in the arrangement of items in photographs, even in the timing of radio broadcasts. If you don't know there's a message at all, you can't try to decrypt it. This principle is still used today in digital steganography, hiding data and image files and such, but the physical ingenuity required in the pre-digital era was extraordinary. Let's talk about the human factor for a moment, because this is where pre-internet encryption really differs from today. Every encrypted message before computers required human beings to carefully follow procedures. One mistake, one reused key, one careless word, and the whole system could collapse. The Germans got sloppy with Enigma, starting messages with predictable phrases or using the same settings. The British at Bletchley Park exploited these human errors ruthlessly. Alan Turing, who you probably know from the movie about him, developed techniques that weren't just about mathematics. He understood psychology. He knew that German operators were lazy on Monday mornings. He knew they'd start messages with "nothing to report" on quiet days. He turned human nature into a weapon against encryption, and that's something no algorithm alone could do. The thing about all these pre-internet encryption methods is that they required training, discipline, and often courage. A code talker had to memorize extensive vocabularies and stay calm under fire. An Enigma operator had to set up their machine precisely according to daily instructions while possibly under bombardment. A spy using a one-time pad had to destroy the evidence while potentially being watched. There was no password manager, no automatic encryption. Just human beings trying not to make fatal mistakes. And mistakes were fatal, quite literally. Captured resistance fighters with codebooks were tortured. Spies with encryption devices were executed. The stakes were as high as they could possibly be, and yet people developed and used these systems successfully, protecting secrets that changed the course of history. As we moved into the 1980s, just before the internet revolutionized everything, encryption was becoming increasingly mathematical. Public key cryptography was invented in 1976. Where you could have a public key that anyone could use to send you encrypted messages, but only you with your private key could read them. This was so revolutionary that when it was published, the NSA actually tried to suppress it, claiming it was classified information even though it had been independently discovered by academics. This pre-internet era also saw the development of hash functions and digital signatures, the building blocks of modern internet security. But they were being used in closed systems, government networks, military communications. The idea that everyone would one day encrypt their casual conversations would have seemed absurd. Encryption was for secrets, for governments, for spies. Not for ordinary people. There's a poignant irony in all of this. The encryption methods developed before the internet were often more secure in practical terms than what came after. Not because the mathematics was better, but because the systems were closed. An Enigma machine couldn't be hacked remotely. A one-time pad couldn't be compromised by malware. A Navajo code talker couldn't be phished. The vulnerabilities were physical, human, but not digital. But we've also democratized it. The encryption that once required rooms full of machinery and teams of trained operators now happens automatically billions of times per second on devices in our pockets. Every time you see that little padlock icon in your browser, you're using mathematical principles that were cutting-edge military secrets just a few decades ago. The legacy of pre-internet encryption lives on in surprising ways. Modern cryptography still uses many of the same mathematical principles developed for machines like Enigma. The one-time pad remains theoretically unbreakable. The principle of the Navajo code talkers, that cultural knowledge can be a form of encryption, has echoes in modern security practices. We're still fighting the same battle between those who want to keep secrets and those who want to uncover them, just with different tools. What strikes me most about this history is the creativity born from constraint. When you can't just increase your key length or update your encryption algorithm with a software patch, you have to think differently. You have to be clever about the physics, the psychology, the procedures. The people who developed these pre-internet encryption methods were working with fundamental limitations, and yet they created systems that protected the most important secrets of their time. Some of these secrets remain locked away even now. There are encrypted messages from World War II that have never been decoded. There are Cold War communications that died with the spies who sent them. In our age of data breaches and leaked documents, there's something almost romantic about secrets that stayed secret, messages that were truly for the recipient's eyes only. The story of pre-internet encryption is ultimately a human story. It's about our eternal need to communicate privately, to share information with allies while keeping it from enemies. It's about the brilliant minds who turned that need into mathematical and mechanical reality. And it's about the ordinary people who used these extraordinary tools, often at great personal risk, to protect what mattered most. Every time you send an encrypted message today, you're part of a tradition that stretches back through the Cold War spies, the World War codebreakers, the Renaissance conspirators, all the way to ancient times when Julius Caesar was shifting letters in the alphabet to protect his military dispatches. The tools have changed beyond recognition, but the fundamental human needs they serve remain exactly the same.